Hi and welcome to the Aspire Europe Limited Competent Program Controls course. In this module, we're going to talk about designing controls that will help you deliver your program successfully. I'm Rod Sowden, Managing Director of Aspire Europe and lead author for P3M3 and MSP, and I hope to be able to share some experiences with you on the way through. Okay, so when we think about controls, what are we talking about? Well, this could be a huge topic, so we're just going to try and nail this one down a little bit. First of all, we need to think about standards. What is it that people need to do? What's those minimum requirements? Then we need to think about the processes that they have to follow. Sometimes that will be embedded in toolkits and templates, but there needs to be a sequence of events people need to be able to follow to actually deliver the standard effectively. And then the people themselves need to be competent enough to deliver the standard and be able to use the process, tools and systems. And if we add all that together, we get controls. Now, what is the scope of controls? Well, traditionally, if we're thinking in terms of project management, we think in terms of time, cost and quality, or scope as it is in this diagram. If we can keep that iron triangle together, then we should be okay. In the program world, it's slightly different, and we should be thinking in terms of the blueprint, which is our target operating model and the definition of all the outcomes we need to deliver, the projects, which are basically our costs of getting there, and the benefits, which are the reason for going. Now, those three things need to hang together under the control mechanisms, because if there's a change in a project that affects the outcome, which is defined in the blueprint, that could undermine the benefit. Equally, if somebody says we need more benefits, it will change the outcomes, which means the project scopes will have to change. So those are the three bases of control in a program, slightly different to a project, but the same principle. We're trying to control time, cost, and quality, but we do it in a different way. We see it in terms of benefits, blueprint, and projects. Now, if you've done MSP, you'll be quite familiar with that. And if you haven't, then maybe it's somewhere you could do some more investigation. So when we're thinking about it, we've got to think about the plan, controls, dependencies, transition arrangements, and how we manage the governance of decisions. So when we're designing our controls, there's some core principles we need to get to. Now on the right-hand side, you'll see a number of examples where those principles have not been followed. And basically there is tons and tons and tons of examples of big programs where their plans have run out of control. And even though it's planning, it says planning is weak, it's rushed, over optimism, basically the root cause of failure was in the way they were being controlled, because if those things were weak, the control system should have picked them up. Okay, so we need a consistent approach to controls that we apply across our programs and projects. We need transparency and understand actually what's going on, and that can only really be achieved by effective reporting and analysis of statistics that were driven by metrics. You know, you guys, they'll have done the planning course, so you will know all about earned value, critical path, milestones. If a project misses a milestone, it's going to be late. All right, unless there's an intervention to bring it back, it will be late. Don't believe that it's a one-off. There is no such thing. And if it misses a stage gate deadline, it's going to be very late. So we've got to be metrics driven. And just on that stage gate thing, quite honestly, if they miss their stage gate, they should be put red, because that project is definitely in trouble. Now, at a program level, we are a little bit looser around milestones and gates, but they're just as important. We need to make sure that we've got control of change, and most problems come from failure to control projects, which have impacts on benefits and outcomes. So the impact is much wider than the isolated view of the change when it was being assessed. And stakeholders need to know what's going on. They absolutely do not like surprises that are bad news at the last minute. They don't really like it, so they need to be part of the process. Anybody is involved in the kind of consultancy around a project or a program, and it needs to know actually what's going on. Okay, so there's some control principles. And when we're putting a program together, good old MSP has given us this, we need to have a monitoring and control strategy. And that will look from a program perspective about what we need to do to start up a project, how we close it, how do we control it on its way through, how do we manage dependencies between projects, how do we control information and make sure that we're not seeing sporadically different information, or it's not based on different concepts, so that when we see a set of projects that are green, that we know they're green, that they're using the same criteria to assess the fact they're green, that we've got consistent ways of planning and we've got ways of estimating that mean we get consistency across the projects and programs. All those things need to be put down in writing and people need to understand. Now, you can write fantastic essays on this stuff, but we need to think about how we design the information that we're going to use. When you're designing the implementation of controls, it can be across any one of these topics that you can see down the right hand side, whether it's risks, issues, requirements, outcomes, assets, assurance, whatever it happens to be that you're designing your control around. We need a consistent approach to defining how that control works. Now, for this part of the course, we used P3M3 to help us. Now, when I designed P3M3, we put in a number of perspectives, one of which was management control. And then in version 3, we designed in what we called threads, which were areas that we considered were against each of those perspectives. And you'll see a kind of version of them in front of you. So when we're designing a control area, and why don't we just pick on issue management, we need to have a standard. What do we expect people to do? We need to be clear on their responsibilities. We need to define a process that they can follow, or there needs to be an understanding how it should work. We need to think about techniques, impact analysis, or if we were talking about risk, early warning indicators. What systems and tools should we be using, or should they be using to support this, and then the guidance. And we also need to think about the competencies and skills of the people that are doing the work. And if you're bringing this skill in from a different area, or if we could be buying it in as a service from an external organization, if it was kind of resource management, or we could actually be taking a service, say from commercial, if it's to do with procurement. What sort of service levels are we going to get from these guys? Now, the tendency in a lot of organizations is to launch in, read the MSP manual or the Prince2 manual or the APM body of knowledge and start writing up a whole load of guidance, which is actually going to be a wonderful piece of work for somebody, but it's going to have no effect. So you really need to start on standards when you're dealing with this definition stuff. So what is a standard? Well, a standard is something really straightforward. It should be clear and simple and say exactly what you want done. It should focus on the important must-haves when somebody's doing a job. And it should act as either a minimum requirements. It doesn't mean that people can't go beyond that. But if somebody's doing a job around stakeholder management, that we're just saying you must have a stakeholder map or something like that. You should have a comms plan, that kind of thing. So it needs to be clear who has to do this task. And it's much more focused on the what, not the how and when. And it can cascade through the levels because you'll have standards at the portfolio level, standards at the program level, and standards at the project level. But these are strangely the easiest things to write, but they're often missing. And part of the reason that they're missing is people are happier signing off a meandering set of guidance than they are signing off a clear set of rules that people have to comply with. So it's really the first stage of taking control of what's going on around you. In this one, we put some simple stakeholder standards together. If you're working across portfolio, program and project management, you could be quite a complex environment. And as you start to write them up, you realize it gets quite detailed. So it's a good idea to write some guiding principles, okay? Now the guiding principles in this case apply to stakeholder management across all three areas. Yeah, maintain up-to-date comms plans, make sure the stakeholders are assessed and you've got a tracking mechanism. There should be an audit trail of comms, and you should be monitoring which channels work best for you. Okay, so those are kind of generically good things. Now, you don't want to have to rewrite those 4 times. So we put them in as guiding principles, and then we can tighten up on specific standards that you would use. And if we just focus on program management, yeah, we make sure we maintain our stakeholder profiles. Maybe we would take ownership of certain ones on behalf of the portfolio if there's a certain group we're dealing with a lot. Make sure that they do the communications with the external stakeholders. So you don't want your projects firing off at all sorts of press agencies and things. You want the program to control that. So that's why the program should deal with all external comms. Projects can deal with their own teams and their own stakeholders, but not outside, because the program needs control, because you may have multiple messages that you want to communicate in a certain order from projects. Then you have a aggregated comms plan that covers the project, and roles and responsibilities are clear for different types of projects. Maybe you've got account managers involved. So that's the kind of thing we need to be looking at. And of course, you can see the project ones, portfolio ones, they're all covered in our course. So that's really what stakeholder standards are all about. Now, developing a process. All right, so this is another area when we're using P3M3 that causes some problems, because again, we find these wonderful documents with everything written into them, but nobody ever reads it. So you need to have processes, because if you're looking at maturity, the first step of maturity is to write down what it is people are supposed to be doing. So it can be quite rudimentary in the early days and then develop up. One of the big problems for particularly people at level 2 maturity is they write down too much, which means nobody really knows what's going on, so they just get on and do it their own way. So things to think about there are about keeping it lean and simple, and the simpler the process, the easier it is in practical terms for people to follow. So some things to think about: level of formalization, key steps, who owns the process. Yeah, that really comes back to your PMO and your governance model, and who's involved in the steps and responsibilities for making them happen. Tools and systems that you might use to store the data. You know, quite often you see organizations in the early days using templates. What they do is create a document where they write a heading for everything they've ever heard of, right? That's not what you're looking for. You're looking for a way of organizations to gather the right data, not every bit of data. Yeah, and then we'll have some guidance to support the process and some training. So we don't write this mighty tune, waft it out and say, away you go, everybody. It needs to be rolled in. And we do more about that in the PMO implementation modules. So there we go, a pretty classic swim lane diagram. In our experience, they are absolutely the best way of doing this. Anybody that puts one of those in front of us and can prove that it's being used gets themselves a ticket level 3, because that's all you need to have. You don't need a 50-page manual to tell people what the risk process is. One of the issues when you're having a P3M3 assessment is the process isn't written down because it's embedded within a tool, and sometimes yeah, that needs a little bit of thinking about if we're the assessors, because to design the tool, you've had to design the process, and maybe you can't see it written down, but it does exist. So you can see there the roles and responsibilities flowing nicely, who does the tasks, answers most of the requirements for a process that we've flagged up. Now, let's have a think about scaling controls. Now, if you remember going back to good old MSP and this table, which talked about different levels of outcome predictability. Yeah, and on the left-hand side, high predictability, because we've seen them before. You can touch what's going to happen, or it's very clear what's going to happen, or you're just creating something, you don't implement it. Over on the far side, low engineering techniques, lack of experience in this area. Business transformation, by definition, is less predictable. And once you get into societal and political change, it gets a lot more less predictable. if that's good use of English. So what we need to think about, therefore, is scaling our controls, because maybe the ones on the left-hand side don't need quite so bigger controls as those on the right-hand side. So there's this great model by people called Shenhar and De Vere Diamond Model. And what you can see there is they've produced this tool for assessing the level of complexity. And they've used 4 dimensions: technology, novelty, complexity, and pace. And we've implemented this with a number of clients, and it works extraordinarily well. There's a tendency to put more controls when the cost is higher. Actually, a cost is about scale, not necessarily risk. So obviously, you've got to keep control over high budget programs. But the dangers are the ones that have got high levels of novelties, that you've not done them before, that you're using technology that nobody's used. Maybe it's making complex changes to the working practices. So it could be a very low cost project that's making complex process changes in the way you handle data, and the pace. Yeah, and of course, you guys who are using Agile will be talking about pace and all that kind of stuff. Well, actually, you can be rushing headlong into a disaster if you're not careful. So mapping your level of risk against this is a really good idea. Now, the reality is that for most clients, scale is an issue. So what we've taken here in this diagram is we've taken their ideas around complexity, because the likelihood of us being able to achieve it technically is going to affect by its novelty, its technology, the complexity of the process change that's going to be needed, and the pace at which we're delivering it. We can control place, but we can't really control the other 3. So those are factors that are kind of high dangers to us, high risk, if you like. So we need to scale based on that. But we also need to take on board scale. So if you're spending billions of pounds, people are going to want to know you're spending it well. If you're taking a long time over this program, it's timescales, you'll be absorbing organizational energy when you're doing this. If it rolls on and on and on and on and on, the organization may not be able to cope with that level of long-term commitment. And then we've got to think about capacity. Have we got the organizational capability to do this? Have we got the resources? Has the market got the resources? And what levels of structural change? So if you think about something like High Speed 2, it ticks all the high risk boxes, doesn't it? It's novelty. Well, it's not. It's novelty in this country. It's not particularly novelty around the world. But we've never put something like that through the heart of England. Technology, yes. Well, that we're by going high speed, we're at the leading edge of technology. We all need to travel at 200 miles an hour to go 100 miles an hour from Birmingham into London. So for reasons best known to the business case, we have to go that fast. And the process, how does that train line interact with other train lines and motorways on its path? How does it actually deal with that? And what's the pace of it? How quickly do we need it done? And we've seen some high-speed projects in China go wrong because they've done them too quickly. And then on the other one, well, cost, it's the most expensive program we've ever seen in this country, so it ticks the boxes on that one. Time scale, well, that keeps changing, doesn't it? But the early time scales were much more ambitious, proved to be unachievable. We're looking at the capacity of the country to deal with it as the supply chain. It got the capacity to provide the facilities. Just at the moment, in the summer of 21, High Speed 2's absorbing most of the cement production capacity in the UK. And then structural changes to network infrastructure that's going to support it. Okay, well, I hope you found that presentation interesting. I'm sure you're going to need a cup of coffee now to get over all that information. Good luck with the module, and I'll speak to you again on future videos.